Good afternoon, everyone. I am Maria Theresa Pacman, and today my colleagues and I in the English 279 Sci-Fi Horror team will present to you an analysis of this fascinating and scary genre. What is sci-fi horror? There are many definitions of sci-fi horror, and this is how we define it. A subgenre of both science fiction and horror that combines scientific or futuristic settings and a fear of the unknown to create horror in the audience. It is also important to distinguish terror and horror. Terry Heller says, "Terror is the fear that harm will come to oneself. Horror is the emotion one feels in anticipating and witnessing harm coming to others for whom one cares." The first sci-fi horror novel was Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, written in 1818. The novel was a turning point as it brought a level of literary merit to the field, encouraging other horror authors to expand their characters' emotional arcs and narrative themes. The iconic screen adaptation of Frankenstein was directed by James Whale in 1931. Elements of sci-fi horror. Science fiction and horror overlap to create a scary story where the sources of fears include characters such as aliens, mutants, robots, or enhanced humans, undiscovered scientific possibilities for teleportation or time travel, and speculative future technologies such as supercomputers or advanced weapons. Sci-fi horror themes may exploit man's primal fears, such as finding out that we are not alone in the universe through discovery of an alien artifact, species, spacecraft, planet, etc., dying alone in a vacuum of space, being trapped in a confined space with a deadly threat, and being infected in a pandemic of a disease for which there is no cure. The following slides show movies that capture these fears. Fear of finding out we are not alone. The film Invaders from Mars, 1953, depicts the fear of finding out we are not alone in the universe through 11-year-old amateur astronomer David, who sees a Martian spacecraft land in his backyard. This was the first film to show aliens in color and the first film to explore alien abduction and alteration of humans as a central horror element of the film. Fear of dying alone in the vacuum of space. Although 2001: A Space Odyssey is considered a classic sci-fi film, Frank's death graphically portrays the terror of dying alone in the vast void of space. Being trapped in a confined space with a threat. This is where an alien or monster appears aboard a ship, space station, or research outpost from which there is no means of escape. In Alien, Ripley is stuck in an escape pod with the alien. Here is a classic clip from Alien showing Ripley trapped in the escape pod with the alien. Being infected with an incurable disease. The prospect of an incurable epidemic or pandemic of natural, man-made, or alien origin is terrifying in its right. The Andromeda strain, 1971, in which a satellite crashes to Earth carrying an alien virus, typifies this subgenre. The elements of sci-fi horror are shown beautifully in this scene in 2001: A Space Odyssey, where the apes discover the monolith. It shows the fear, anxiety, and awe. even for primitive hominids of discovering a strange artifact. Although the apes are initially frightened by the black monolith, they soon huddle around it and touch it even though they don't know what it is or where it came from. This foreshadows the humans' fear of and fascination with technology, the future and the unknown that is the basis of the sci-fi horror. Other features of sci-fi horror includes varying levels of real science. A sci-fi horror film can emphasize the sci-fi side, grounded in scientific reality, or can be more on the horror side, emphasizing the supernatural elements. Grand ideas or social implications. When the idea is to produce fear in the audience, grand ideas and social commentary become secondary. On the other hand, a well-written story can make the viewer think about his precarious place in the universe. For example, in War of the Worlds 1953, the invincible alien invasion was stopped by lowly bacteria in Earth's atmosphere. Characterization. Stock characters can be used in sci-fi horror films for their shock value, such as the hunchback, lab-assisted Fritz in Frankenstein 1931, or characters may be developed with great depth, such as mad scientist Seth Randall in The Fly 1986. Plot complexity. Sci-fi horror plots tend to have well-woven sequences of cause and effect to maximize the viewer's sense of horror and helplessness. Violence is typically high. It's called horror for a reason. Some horror movies can be horrors of the mind and not show as much physical violence. Since a large percentage of sci-fi horror movies involve aliens, we divided alien horror into 2 major and 3 minor subgenres. Aliens out there, xenomorphs, come from Greek, foreign, or strange form, and visitors to Earth, which can be divided into invaders who come to conquer the Earth and human race, abductors who work surreptitiously, and refugees who rely on humans for their survival. Note that aliens that come to Earth are also xenomorphs. This distinction refers to the plotline rather than the alien itself. Xenomorphs. This is the alien queen in the movie Aliens 1986. Alien 1979 and the 1986 sequel Aliens redefined the alien horror genre in large part due to H.R. Giger's design of the aliens. Before Alien 1979, aliens were depicted as little green men or slimy blobs. H.R. Giger created the concept of biomechanoids, living creatures with machine-like construction. Giger's art taps into a terrifying vein of fantasy involving birth, death, reproduction, and suffocation, and all these elements figure prominently in the films. Invaders. An example of alien invaders is the 1953 film War of the Worlds. The movie is based on H.G. Wells' 1898 classic book and the terrifying 1938 Orson Welles radio broadcast that had thousands fleeing in the streets of New York City. Abductors. An example of alien abductors is the film Fire in the Sky, 1993, which is based on Travis Walton's book, The Walton Experience, that describes his alleged alien abduction. In the movie, aliens mercilessly performed traumatic experiments on Walton in which he was gagged, his jaw and one eye were clamped open, a device was inserted into his neck, and a needle-like probe was stuck into his brain through his eye while he was awake. Afterwards, Walton found himself back on Earth naked, disoriented, and severely traumatized. Here is a clip from Fire in the Sky showing the experiment. District 9, 2009 depicts aliens that came to Earth on a disabled spacecraft, starving and half dead. This unusual film portrays aliens as pathetic creatures who depend on human tolerance for survival. Now, my colleague Randall will present an overview of sci-fi horror films from 1950s through the 1960s.
Thank you, Maria. To get a better understanding of how sci-fi horror developed during the 1950s and sort of into the 1960s, we actually got to take a deeper look at 1950s history. During this time, many things were happening. One relevant thing was the Cold War. It wasn't really the driving force behind a lot of sci-fi horror movies, but it did inspire a wave of invasion movies. People dying because aliens were coming to Earth, killing them, trying to take over, things of that nature. In fact, post-Cold War, Soviet expansionism in Europe fueled a lot of fear in America. There's just a general fear that the Russians were going to take over the world. This actually encouraged American containment. Essentially, it was a policy that allowed long-term, patient, but firm, and very vigilant containment of Russian expensive tendencies, such as just trying to spread more communism throughout the world. This gave a very good rationale for a buildup in arms in America during the time period. In fact, in 1950, a national security report known as NSC 68 had echoed Truman's recommendation that the country use military force to contain the communist expansionism anywhere it seemed to be occurring. Films such as 1951's Invasion of the Body Snatchers, 1953's Invaders from Mars, and 1958's I Married a Monster from Outer Space do a good job of showing the general anxiety of communism.
A beautiful, innocent girl on her honeymoon. Her passionate dreams of perfect romance turned into a living nightmare. The man she had loved was merely the hollow shell for the invaders from outer space. Was it true? Could space monsters mate with Earth women? See the startling answer in the shocker of them all. Could she touch the body of this masquerading alien who wanted to learn the secrets of human love?
Your race has no women. It can't have children. It will die out.
Eventually, we'll have children with you.
What kind of children?
Space children, spreading a network of terror through a top-secret missile base in a nation's desperate hour of decision. Space children, the dangerous pawns of a power so strange that no sentries can stop them. No army can destroy them.
Get those kids out of there!
In 1949, the Soviets tested an atom bomb of their own creation. In response, President Truman announced that the United States would build even more destructive atomic weapons. The hydrogen bomb, or super bomb, really helped many American officials encourage the development of atomic weapons as a whole. Not only that, it helped encourage the deadly arms race during the time. And there are several movies that focus on the fear of nuclear fallout and what it could bring. 1953's The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms is one, and 1955's Day the World Ended is another. Moving closer to the end of the decade, on October 4th, 1957, a Soviet R-7 intercontinental ballistic missile was launched, and it had Sputnik on it. It was the world's first artificial satellite and the first man-made object to be placed in the Earth's orbit. Sputnik's launch came to a surprise, and not a very pleasant one, to the United States. Space was the next frontier, and it was a crucial one not to lose to the Soviets. Since it was so late in the decade, not many sci-fi horror films show this sort of fear of otherworldly threats. But 1956's Fire Maze from Outer Space is one, and 1959's The Angry Red Planet is another. Moving into the 1960s, many things were changing and happening. America began the Vietnam War, entered the Cuban Missile Crisis, watched Kennedy get assassinated, and have the Voting Rights Act placed for many people at the time. However, sci-fi horror as a concept and a genre wasn't all that booming. There was no real fear during this time that sci-fi horror could adequately express. Gone were the days of space monsters from other worlds coming to change your way of life. Some of the films during the time did touch upon this theme though. 1960s Village of the Damned is one example of a force that wants to come and change the American way of life. 1962 The Brain That Wouldn't Die shows the danger of science going too far. 1964 The Creeping Terror touches upon otherworldly threats coming to kill us all. All of them touch upon the sci-fi horror genre, but none of them touch upon the issues that were going down during the time. However, in the 1960s, greater use of color and greater promiscuousness in movies were making their way into the industry. This was a response to the lure and rise of television during the time. In the United States, concern about the increase in sex, violence, and profanity in movies led to the adoption of the movie rating system in 1968. During this time period, lightweight cameras with portable synchronous sound equipment made it much easier to film on location, film faster stocks, film indoors, and at night. This helped bring new angles and filming techniques. In 1965's Monster A Go-Go, the director wanted his actor Henry Hite, who was playing the main monster at the time, to be 10 feet tall. The actor himself was only 7'6", so the director used the newer technology available to film him at an upward angle, giving him that much needed 10 feet. This also gave way to a lot of other movies being able to be filmed in full color. 1966 Queen of Blood is one of the first sci-fi horror movies to be filmed in full color.
And the great question about space still remains. Does life exist on another planet?
A message of some kind.
Reported that an unknown object has crossed the orbit of the moon and is rapidly approaching Earth.
Be there more ready for Mars than we think, huh?
I hope so. Do you think you're getting married almost?
We're obviously in touch with beings who have a very highly evolved technology.
The astronauts from the other planet. The rescue ship landed here, and one of them is alive. We're going to bring her with us.
Perhaps she is only accustomed to some sort of liquid nourishment. Maybe non-existent in their society. There may be some sort of intellectual insect.
Which feeds on human beings.
I'm really afraid now for the first time.
Perhaps she was some sort of royalty where she came from. The queen.
This gave way to films such as 1968's The Astro Zombies to be made in full color, and full color has just sort of been a thing ever since then. Now, to further explain how sci-fi horror has evolved and changed, Danith will talk about the 1970s and the 1980s.
Thank you, Randall. CGI was invented during this time. Role of women in the society was going through a turning point in the 1970s. Cultural context was also in many movies during this era. The Brood is an example of being trapped with a threat. Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Invasion of the Body Snatcher, and Alien are all examples that we are not alone in the universe, or how we feel of not being alone.
Ash? You open the door? What is it? Ash.
The decade of 1980s in Western cinema saw the return of studio-driven pictures. Coming from the filmmakers-driven New Hollywood era of the 1970s, they may have big budget, big crews, and big cast, including big-name actors. They may have big explosions, big action, or lots of computer-generated images. Effect. This era was also characterized by the introduction of high-concept films. E.T. is a high-concept film. It's a movie about fear of not being alone, but also being attached by a threat. Alien is like an incurable disease because they keep coming out.
Get away from her, you bitch! Now I introduce Kenia to explain movies in the 1990s and 2000s.
Thank you, Danith. Science horror movies in the 90s. So popular sci-fi horror themes in the 90s included the other factor, that being that we don't understand nor can relate to or have compassion for. For example, a theme was aliens. 2 movies were making comebacks, such as the 3rd installment of the Alien series and a 1994 adaptation of The Body Snatchers from the 1950s. Space in general was a fear of the public at the time. In Cube, there's a that is constant during the film, even at the end. Cube is about a randomly chosen group of people trying to escape out of it. There's booby traps all around, which emits the fear of not knowing what will happen next. In the third installment of the Alien series, Ripley is the only survivor when she lands on Fiorina 161, a wasteland inhabited by former inmates of a maximum security prison. Ripley must lead the men to destroy the alien, hunting down the men and the guards. In The Body Snatchers, EPA agent Steve Malone travels to a remote military base to check out toxic waste material that was reported there. When people begin to act strange, he's convinced that they're slowly being replaced by plant-like aliens. In the 2000s, because of film technology at the time, 3D movies were becoming popular and the use of motion capture as well. Motion capture refers to actors acting out their scenes in heavy dot-centered suits, recording their motions and expressions by a digital camera, which is then later transferred by keyframe artists. In Alien vs. Predator, Charles Bishop, a scientist, travels to Antarctica with a group to find a mysterious source of heat. While there, they uncover a pyramid and a parasitic alien as well. All the while, another species called predators have arrived to destroy the aliens, and Bishop and his crew are stuck in the middle of it. Set for a remote planet, members of the colony ship Covenant discovered their uncharted planet is already inhabited by hostile alien lifeforms, forcing them to fight for their lives. This movie used motion capture. Darkest Hour centers in on the fight for survival of 5 friends stranded in their trip to Moscow due to the unexpected invasion of aliens. The invisible aliens absorb all Earth's energy and life. The world dark. Escaping them seems impossible. This movie was released in 3D.
Welcome to Moscow.
Look at this place. 1, 2, 3.
Eliminate. Scusate.
I've never seen anything like this.
Human casualties are massive. It's impossible to make visual contact. They're absorbing all our power supplies.
This wasn't just Moscow. New York, London, Paris, Tokyo, all reported invisible invaders.
They came here with a plan. They can see us, but we can't see them.
What do they want?
Energy, electricity.
Oh my god.
Get inside! The way it lit up that cop car. Electricity gives it away. Warning devices.
In conclusion, we hope everyone understands that in order to make a good to relatively decent sci-fi horror movie, the movie needs to try to either show the fear we all exhibit when we find out we're not alone, the fear of us dying in space alone, the fear of being trapped in an enclosed space with a threat, the fear of being infected with or by an incurable disease, or the mystery of finding a space oddity. We just want to thank you so much for taking the time to watch our videos.